I never believed in curses, until the day the envelope arrived. It was thick, yellowed with age, and sealed with a wax imprint I didn't recognize. My name was scrawled across the front in shaky black ink. No return address. No explanation. Just the strange weight of something final. Inside was a deed. Not to a house, not to land in the city, but to an island. A jagged smudge of rock adrift in the Atlantic. Its name, written in faded letters, sent a chill down my spine, Greymark Isle. The letter claimed it had been in my family for generations. A place passed down, abandoned, forgotten, until me. And as I read the fine print, I realized it wasn't just a gift. It was an inheritance I couldn't refuse. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the distant echo of waves crashing, followed by something else. Something impossible. A sound I can only describe as screaming, carried not through my ears, but straight into my bones. I should have burned the letter. I should have ignored the deed, thrown it into the sea. But something about the island called to me, like a hand reaching from the dark water. And when you inherit something tied to blood, to history, you don't just walk away. Not without consequences. Before I tell you what happened on Greymark Isle, make sure you subscribe. You'll want to hear this until the very last scream. I took the ferry out on a grey morning, the kind where the clouds hang low and the sea itself looks dead. The captain who sold me the ticket asked where I was headed. When I told him, his face drained of color. "Greymark," he muttered. "You don't want to set foot there. Shoreline's cursed. Folks say the screams are older than the island itself." I laughed it off, but he didn't. He refused to look me in the eye after that. Hours later, when the island finally rose out of the fog, I understood his fear. The shoreline wasn't sand. It was sharp black stone, jagged like broken teeth. Every wave that hit it made the rocks vibrate, almost humming. And then, it happened. As the ferry drew closer, I heard it, a scream carried on the wind. Not human, not animal, but something in between. High, endless, like agony stretching across centuries. I froze. The captain muttered a prayer under his breath and refused to dock. He threw me a rope ladder and ordered me to climb down before the tide turned. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. I stepped onto the island, my boots crunching against the slick black rock. The ferry's engine roared behind me, and before I could speak, it vanished into the fog. The scream came again, this time louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from the wind. It was rising from the shoreline itself. And as I stood there, the rocks beneath my feet trembled, vibrating like a throat trying to form words. The island greeted me like a held breath, tight and waiting to be released. I climbed from the black rocks to a narrow path in the heather, the plants brittle as bones. The scream thinned to a thread behind me, never gone, simmering at the edge of hearing. My inheritance came with a key, iron, ornate, warm in my pocket despite the cold. The map in the paper sketched a keeper's cottage near the high ridge beside a decommissioned fog bell. Even if I shouted now, the mainland would answer with only water and weather. The path corkscrewed between basalt outcrops that looked melted and frozen mid-flow. Here and there, someone had tried to tame the place, rusting cable ties, a collapsed fence, a row of stakes bleached the color of driftwood. Every stake had a notch carved near the top, as if counting days until the count failed. The cottage appeared as a square shadow against the sky, slate roof peeled at the edges, one window boarded, the other a blind eye of salt-clouded glass. When I lifted the latch, the door did not resist. It opened like it had been waiting. Inside, iodine, damp paper, and something metallic, like a nicked tongue. A warped table. A cot stitched with seagrass twine. On the far wall, an oilskin chart pinned beneath a whalebone. Not depths and soundings, but words written around the island in ring after ring, like a rosary unfurled. Each ring repeated a single phrase in a different hand: "Keep them calm. them. The floor flexed, the cottage sighing as a gust shouldered its side. A nail squealed. From the ridge came the dull clonk of the fog bell as though a giant had exhaled. The tone spread across the island in a low ribbon, and under it, the shoreline screamed again, bending to match the bell's note, a choir following a tuning fork. I told myself wind could make any shape if the rock was ugly enough. I told myself the bell, though decommissioned, might still swing on some rotten hinge. Then I found the hinge pin on the floor beneath the bell cradle, corroded through, snapped years ago. The bell could not move. A ledger lay on the table, bound in sailcloth. Inside were entries in a tight, precise hand. No names, only dates and notes, sea glass arranged on the threshold, returned to tide. Screams at dusk, poured sand into fissures. 2 hours of quiet after frozen brine applied. Apologies go unheard. Apologies for what? I took a path behind the cottage to a ridge where the island spine showed through the grass like vertebrae. From there, the entire shoreline, a broken ring of black rock with pale seams that looked like scars. Something white dotted the seams every few yards. Markers. I climbed down, palms raw, and knelt by one. It wasn't paint. It was salt, caked into the fissures in deliberate lines. Someone had poured it there as a ward. The salt had recrystallized into a lace of knives. Beneath the crust, I heard it faintly, the thrum of trapped air, the wet rattle of a place trying to breathe through stone. The scream rose, not from the wind, not from the sea, but from inside the rock, traveling those salted seams like veins. When I brushed a fingertip against the salt, the seam pulsed under my skin and a voice that was not mine murmured one word from the island's throat: return. I spent that first night in the cottage, though spent feels generous. Every hour was a barter with sleep I never fully bought. The ledger lay open on the table, its pages curling in the damp, each entry a repetition of dread. Keep them calm. Keep them calm. Keep them calm. Over and over, across years, maybe decades, until the ink blurred into madness. The screams rose with the tide. At midnight they braided together, dozens of voices tangled in agony, then fell into silence so sudden it felt surgical. The quiet was worse. In the absence of sound, I could feel the walls listening. I lit the oil lamp and swore I saw the flame bend toward the floorboards, as though pulled by a draft that wasn't there. Something breathed beneath me. Something vast. At dawn I staggered outside. The sea was a plain of hammered silver, and the rocks wept with condensation. Salt crust clung to my boots like barnacles. I followed the ridge path down to a cove, where the sea had carved a hollow cave into the basalt. The air inside the cave was warm, wrong. My voice echoed when I whispered, but the echo came back changed, slower, deeper, as if another throat had caught the sound and reshaped it. Against the wall lay a cairn of stones stacked with care. Each stone bore carvings, spirals, waves, and what looked like screaming faces, mouths open, eyes gouged deep. Someone had built a shrine here, and it wasn't for any god I knew. I touched the top stone and it crumbled like ash. Underneath was something soft. My hand recoiled, heart hammering. Not moss. Not plant. Flesh. A finger, gray with salt burn, curled like it had been reaching. Human remains, sealed into the cairn. I stumbled back, bile flooding my throat. The scream surged again, this time erupting from inside the cave. It wasn't a sound that passed through air, it hit me in the marrow, vibrating every bone until my knees gave out. The ledger's words came back to me, poured sand into fissures. 2 hours of quiet. Rituals. Attempts. Wards. Whoever lived here hadn't been a caretaker, they'd been a jailer. And the island was the prison. I staggered into daylight, lungs shuddering. The sea had risen higher than it should have, fingers of water reaching for the path. The foam hissed where it touched the salt seams, as if water and rock were enemies. I followed the seams uphill, each one throbbing faintly beneath my boots, a heartbeat locked inside stone. At the ridge, the fog bell groaned again without moving. The tone clanged in my head until tears stung my eyes. And then, layered beneath the ringing, came a voice, faint but deliberate. My name. It wasn't the shout of a stranger. It was the whisper of someone I loved. Someone who couldn't be here. Someone who had died 3 years ago. The shoreline screamed in answer, long and jagged, drowning the voice before I could recognize it again. The salt seams crackled, shedding white powder as though the island itself strained against the chains that bound it. I should have run. But inheritance binds heavier than blood, and when a dead voice calls you from stone, you listen. The second night fell with a weight that pressed the island flat beneath its own darkness. I tried to bar the cottage door, wedging driftwood against the frame, but the gaps between the boards whistled like lips muttering secrets. Every seam in the walls seemed to breathe with me. I set the ledger aside, but my eyes kept crawling back to it. One line near the end caught me, if the voice knows your name, it already has you. The words were underlined so hard the pen had torn the paper. The screams came earlier this time, riding the dusk tide. They weren't random. They surged and fell like chanting, as if the entire shoreline was reciting something older than language. I pressed my palms to my ears until my head ached, but the sound drilled through bone. Then, silence. The kind that prickles your skin because you know it's not natural. I opened my eyes, and saw the lamp flame stretching toward the window. The glass was no longer a blind pane. It reflected my face back to me, though I hadn't lit anything strong enough for a reflection. I leaned closer, heart racing. The reflection smiled. I didn't. I stumbled back as the window fogged from inside, shapes scribbling themselves across the condensation. Letters. A sentence. My name. And below it, words that froze me colder than the sea air, we remember your blood. The flame snapped black. The room drowned in shadow. Then the boards beneath me vibrated, the same throat sound I'd felt at the shoreline. The cottage was no shelter, it was a mouth. I bolted outside, the night air cutting like knives. The fog bell moaned again, though the wind was dead. The sound dragged me uphill, my legs moving before I could reason with them. On the ridge, moonlight cut silver scars across the salt seams. They were breaking. Crystals crumbled, spilling like sand from a broken hourglass. Through one fissure, I swore I saw an eye, wet, lidless, pressed against the stone as though the island itself was staring out. I screamed into the night, begging the sea to drown it all. But the tide had pulled back unnaturally far, leaving the jagged rocks exposed like black teeth in a skeletal jaw. And from the hollow between them rose steam, carrying with it a smell so vile I gagged, copper, rot, and something like burned hair. That's when I saw movement. Not in the water, not in the sky. From the cracks in the shoreline, shapes began to crawl, thin, long-limbed silhouettes that never fully surfaced. Just arms, just hands, dragging claw-like fingers across the rocks before retreating again. The screams peaked, higher than before, layered into something resembling a choir. And then, just as suddenly, they cut off. All at once. The silence that followed was absolute. And in that silence, from directly behind me, came a whisper so close it stirred my hair. Welcome home. I spun around, but no one was there. Only the ridge path curling into fog, stones glittering with damp salt. My breath plumed white though the air wasn't cold enough. The whisper had been so close it might as well have come from my own throat. I forced myself back down to the cottage, every step haunted by the memory of those clawing silhouettes. The screams hadn't returned, but silence weighed heavier. It was the silence of a predator crouched in tall grass. Inside, the ledger lay open though I'd left it shut. A new line had been written beneath the last entry, the ink wet, the loops familiar, keep them calm. I dropped the book as if it had burned me. That was my handwriting. Panic clawed up my chest. I tore through the ledger's earlier pages, desperate for some proof I was imagining things. Some entries were old, yes, faded, cramped, but others looked newer. Fresher. A few, almost identical to the way my hand curled its letters. It wasn't just a journal. It was a relay baton, passed down. Each caretaker of the island had written here, trapped in the same duty, the same nightmare. The lamp flickered. I heard the boards under the cottage creak, not with weight, but with rhythm. Like breathing. In. Out. In. Out. I couldn't stay inside. I grabbed the key from my pocket and fled into the night. The fog bell loomed at the ridge, skeletal against the stars. I climbed the crumbling stairs and found the bell blackened with soot, its mouth split with a crack. Beneath it, carved into the stone pedestal, were words in 4 languages, bind them with salt. Speak no names. Never promise the sea. I traced the letters with my fingers, my skin crawling. The salt seams below glowed faintly in moonlight, like veins alive with pale fire. But in several places, I saw gaps. Erosion. Wards undone. And from one of those gaps, a sound unlike the others slithered up, less scream, more whisper. Individual. Coherent. You don't belong here. The words were not warning. They were hunger. I stumbled back, heart punching my ribs. The island was not just cursed. It was inhabited by voices imprisoned in stone, desperate for cracks to escape through. And every seam of salt was just a failing lock. The scream rose again, sudden, furious, 1,000 throats clawing to the surface. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the sound vibrated through my skull until blood ran warm from my nose. I thought I saw movement on the tide line, shapes rising from the waves, their outlines lit silver by the moon. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. They didn't step onto the rocks. They stood half-formed in the foam, faces tilted toward me, mouths wide open, screaming without lungs. The ledger's warning thundered in my skull, if the voice knows your name, it already has you. And in that moment, all of them screamed it together. My name, ripped from the rocks, from the tide, from the air itself. I fell to my knees. The salt seams shuddered. The wards broke in 2 distinct places, salt scattering like dust. From one fissure, a hand began to rise. The hand that rose from the fissure wasn't flesh. It was stone, black, glistening, but jointed like a human's. Fingers flexed with grinding pops, salt shards falling from its knuckles. It reached higher, clawing against the night, and for a second I thought it was blind. Then I saw the sliver of white in its palm, an eye, wet and rolling, staring directly at me. I scrambled back from the ridge, my boots slipping on wet grass. The fog bell above me moaned without movement, its broken mouth vibrating as though the island itself were using it as a throat. The hand withdrew, sinking back into the fissure, but not before curling a single finger in my direction, beckoning. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I only ran. Down the ridge, past the cottage, across the jagged rock until the sea slapped cold against my shins. I screamed for the ferry, though I knew it wouldn't come. No captain would dock here. Not now. The Shoreline screamed in answer. The same endless agony, but this time the pitch shifted into something new, laughter. The rocks shook beneath me, sharp edges splitting my palms as I crawled back onto land. That's when I noticed the trail. Not footprints. Not animal tracks. A drag mark, carved into the wet stone, leading from the fissures toward the inner island. Something had already pulled itself free. I followed against my will. Every nerve in my body begged me to stop, but inheritance is a leash you don't see until it yanks you forward. The path cut through heather and dead grass to a circle of stones, an ancient ring, half collapsed, slick with moss. At the center stood an altar carved from basalt, streaked with centuries of salt lines. And lying atop it was a bundle of cloth, I approached, shaking, and peeled back the edge. Inside were bones, small, delicate, human. Child-sized. Their surfaces were crusted with salt, their joints bound with seaweed like some ritual had tried to keep them from separating. Beside the bones was a scrap of parchment sealed under glass. I lifted it with trembling hands. The ink had run, but 3 words were still legible: "Return what's ours." The ground beneath the altar quivered. My ears filled with that same marrow-deep vibration, as though the island's pulse had quickened. Then the screaming stopped again, all at once, replaced by whispers. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Overlapping, circling me like a tide. Some begged. Some cursed. Some imitated voices I knew. My mother. My father. My sister. Each one speaking my name in tones only they could have carried. I dropped the parchment. My head spun. If this place had consumed my bloodline before me, maybe it still remembered every voice. Every scream. Every plea. The altar cracked, spilling bones across the ground. A gust of wind roared through the stone circle, though the sea was still. And in that wind, a single command threaded through all the whispers, in unison. Stay. I don't remember deciding to move, only that my legs were carrying me out of the stone ring with the altar cracking behind me and the word "stay" braided through the marrow of my bones. I stumbled down toward the shore, where the island's black teeth met the breath of the sea. The tide was turning in slow, deliberate swallows, as if the water itself were tasting the island before taking another bite. The ledger weighed in my pack like a second spine. I pulled it free on the rocks, flipping to the back. Between the last entries, my own handwriting, or the island's borrowed version of it, there was a folded page stitched in. Not dated. Not signed. A confession. We tried to return them. The sea gave them back. The mouths in the rock will not accept a promise they did not ask for. Never promised the sea. The wind shifted, the fog bell gave its voiceless groan. Far below, the salt seams winked like dying embers. I followed one seam to where the rocks formed a narrow cleft. Here the salt had been swept aside, not by weather, but by hands. The cleft descended like a throat. I lowered myself in, shoulders scraping basalt, breath turning the air damp and hot. The sound changed here, less scream, more pressing. Like a crowd leaning against a locked door. My fingers found grooves along the wall, marks of nails, dozens, hundreds, dragged downward. At the base of the cleft, water pooled in a black mirror. Not sea. Fresh. It tasted metallic, bright with minerals and something older. The surface trembled without ripples, as if vibrating from a sound I couldn't hear. I held the key, the iron one that came with the deed, over the pool. It warmed until it hurt. A thought rose that wasn't mine, keys open in both directions. I jerked my hand back. The key cooled, but the pool's tremble deepened, and a single bubble rose and burst with a whisper, my name. I should have climbed out. I should have sealed the cleft with salt and stone and ignorance. Instead, I did the one stupid thing the pedestal had warned me never to do. I made a promise. Let me return what's yours, I said, voice barely air. I'll put back what was taken. The island stilled. The pressure behind the walls eased, a held breath released. Above, I heard the surf hush into something like listening. And then the water answered, in voices layered into a single note that pulsed through my bones, bring them. Bring them all. It wasn't a plea. It was a command with a hook. I scrambled out of the cleft, heart thundering, the key now a weight of guilt in my pocket. The altar's scattered bones flashed in my mind. The cairn in the cave. The white dots of salt along the seams like counted debts. The island didn't want an offering. It wanted accounting. Night fell as if a hand had dropped a curtain over the sky. The shoreline began its keening in long bands, but this time the pitch was lower, steadier, purposeful. A procession of sound. Between the screams, I heard it again, my mother's voice, softer now, like a hand on my shoulder in the dark. Don't say yes to the water. Too late, I thought. I'd already said yes. I gathered the bundle of bones from the altar with shaking hands, wrapping them carefully, reverently. The whispers swelled around me, not angry, not grateful. Anticipating. The island seems brightened with a vein-deep glow as I carried the weight toward the cleft. Halfway down the ridge, the fog bell thrummed an octave lower, and the rocks beneath my feet shuddered. From the path ahead, where two seams crossed like a scar, the salt erupted in a spray of crystals, and something heavy pulled itself free onto the trail, blocking my way. It lifted its head. And in my father's voice, from a mouth carved in stone, it said, "Promise kept." The thing blocking my path was neither fully man nor fully stone. Its body looked carved from basalt, shoulders jagged, ribs ridged, but parts of it rippled like wet clay, shifting with every breath. The mouth, slashed too wide, moved unnaturally, lips of rock peeling apart to shape my father's voice. "Promise kept," it said again, slower this time, almost tender. My stomach turned. My father had been dead for years, buried miles inland, nowhere near this island. I staggered back, clutching the bundle of bones against my chest. The creature tilted its head, its eye sockets hollow except for tiny flecks of salt that pulsed faintly, like stars drowning in tar. "You carry them," it whispered. "Good. Return them. Then stay." I tried to speak, to deny it, but the words twisted in my throat. All I could manage was a broken, "Why me?" The thing leaned closer, its basalt jaw cracking open. "Because blood remembers blood. The island chose your line long ago." Behind it, the salt seam split wider, dust spilling like hourglass sand. More hands pressed out, clawing at the air, retreating, clawing again. A prison full of desperate inmates, all reaching for freedom. I bolted. The bundle of bones weighed like lead, but I clutched them tighter, racing past the creature as it didn't move to stop me. It only turned its head slowly, tracking me with that voice that wasn't my father's but wore his shape. Downhill, the cleft yawned ahead. The pool at the bottom glimmered black as oil. Whispers rose from it, overlapping, pleading. "Bring them. Bring them. Bring them." I knelt at the edge, trembling. My hands hovered over the water, bones cradled in cloth. If I let them go, would the island quiet? Would the screams finally end? The ledger's warnings burned in my head. Never promise the sea. Apologies go unheard. Keep them calm. Every line echoed with futility. The wind stopped. The sea stopped. Even my heartbeat felt suspended. The only sound was the chorus below the surface. "Return them," the voices said. "And stay." My fingers loosened. The bundle tipped toward the water. And that's when I saw my reflection, not in the pool, but in the wet rock around it. Dozens of reflections, all of them me at different ages, a child, a teenager, an old man. Each one staring back, mouths open in silent screams. I clutched the bones back to my chest, teeth chattering. No. Not yet. Not until I understood. The island groaned, furious. The fissures rattled, salt exploding like glass. And from the ridge above, the fog bell finally moved, not swung by wind, but struck from inside. The sound split the night, so deep it made the bones in my arms ache. When the echo faded, I wasn't alone. Shapes ringed the cleft, crawling out of fissures, out of the shoreline, out of the seams of the world itself. Half-formed, human in outline but sculpted wrong, they crouched in silence, heads all tilted toward me. The closest one leaned forward, its face split by a grin too wide, too human. And in my own voice, it whispered. "Give them back." They circled me without sound, their bodies shifting between rock and flesh, faces flickering with expressions I knew: family, friends, people long dead. Each one grinned with my own teeth or wept with my sister's eyes. The bones in my arms grew heavier, as if pulled toward them by invisible strings. "Give them back," they chorused, my voice overlapping with dozens of others. It was like listening to myself in an endless hall of mirrors, each reflection cracked at a different angle. I backed up until the cleft's pool licked at my heels. The whispers from its surface had become frantic, urgent. "Bring them, bring them, bring them." I realized, with a clarity colder than the sea air, that if I let the bones fall, they wouldn't be returned. They'd be consumed. One of the creatures stepped closer. Its skin rippled wet, then hardened into basalt again. Its mouth shaped words carefully, like it had borrowed language rather than owned it. "You belong to the island. Your blood promised. You cannot leave." I shook my head, gripping the bundle tighter. "I didn't promise anything. I never." The ground split under my feet. A seam burst wide, spilling salt in a crackling wave. A scream surged out, so violent it tore my knees from under me. The shapes convulsed, jerking like puppets, then straightened in eerie unison. Their mouths opened together, and the scream funneled through them, unified into one massive voice. And that voice said my name. Over. And over. And over. My ears rang with blood. My vision blurred. I pressed the bones against my chest until they bruised my ribs. If the island wanted them so badly, if every seam, every scream was demanding payment, why did the bones feel like the only thing keeping me tethered? The ledger's line echoed again, "Apologies go unheard." Maybe this wasn't about repentance. Maybe this was about feeding something that never got full. I staggered to my feet. "If you want them," I shouted into the cleft, "tell me what they are. Tell me who they were." For the first time, the island hesitated. The scream thinned. The shapes faltered, their borrowed faces rippling into nothing. And from the water itself, a single voice rose, not many, but one. A child's. We were the first. The bundle in my hands twitched, a tiny movement, as if the bones inside remembered life. I almost dropped them. "We were promised freedom," the child's voice continued, tremoring. "But the sea never lets go. The sea keeps everything. And now, so must you." The pool's surface rippled outward like a spreading wound. The shapes leaned closer, heads cocked in silence, waiting for me to obey. I wanted to throw the bones in, to end it, to quiet the voices forever. But another thought split through the fear, sharp and clear: if they had been the first, then there had been many more after. Generations. My bloodline included. And if I surrendered now, I would not be the last. I tightened my grip and stepped back from the water. "No," I said, my voice shaking but louder than I thought possible. The island groaned in rage, salt exploding like gunfire along the seams. The creatures shrieked in unison, their faces unraveling into pure sound. And behind me, from the ridge, came the toll of the fog bell, this time not moaning, not cracked. Clear. Commanding. The sound split the night. And for the first time, the shoreline went silent. The silence after the bell tolled was so complete it felt like a vacuum. My ears buzzed, waiting for the shoreline to answer, for the fissures to erupt again, but nothing came. The creatures froze mid-scream, mouths open, eyes hollow. Then, one by one, they collapsed into piles of salt and shattered stone. I stood trembling, bones still clutched to my chest, staring at the cleft pool. The surface had gone still, reflecting only the faint light of the moon. The child's voice was gone. All the whispers were gone. The island, for the first time since I set foot here, was quiet. But silence doesn't mean safety. Silence is what predators use before they strike. I climbed back to the ridge, every step brittle, and approached the fog bell. Its surface was glowing faintly now, pale veins of light running through the cracked metal. I reached out, hands shaking, and the metal vibrated under my palm. A warmth spread through my skin, then deeper, like a second pulse. The ledger's words burned in my memory, never promise the sea. Keep them calm. Whoever had written those lines had known this bell wasn't just for navigation. It was a weapon. Or maybe, a lock. I whispered, "Who rang it?" The bell hummed in answer. The vibration traveled into my bones, filling my skull with a memory that wasn't mine. For an instant, I saw through someone else's eyes, a man in oilskins, decades ago, standing where I stood, hands pressed against the bell. His lips moved in prayer as the shoreline screamed. He poured salt across the fissures, then struck the bell with his fist until it bled. And the island had quieted, for a time. The vision snapped away, leaving me gasping. The bell was no tool of warning. It was a seal, a temporary chain binding what clawed beneath the rock. And the chain was weakening. Below, the seams glowed faintly where salt had shattered. I could already hear tiny whimpers seeping back through the cracks, timid at first, then rising in courage. The silence had been only a pause, a breath before the next scream. I looked at the bundle of bones. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped them. "Is this what you wanted?" I shouted into the night. "Is this what the island has been screaming for?" The answer came not in words but in movement. The tide surged unnaturally fast, climbing the rocks like a predator scaling prey. Foam hissed at my boots, spraying salt into the air. The fissures all around me pulsed like veins lit by lightning. And then the voices returned. Not in agony this time. In triumph. "Return them," they sang. "Return them, return them." The creatures began to form again, dragging themselves from the seams, from the shoreline, from the water itself. Their faces were clearer now, more human, more familiar. My sister. My grandfather. My mother. My own face, a dozen times over. Each one stretched their hands toward me. Each one demanded. Each one knew my name. I pressed the bones tighter to my chest, trying not to cry. The bell behind me thrummed again, but weaker, like a candle sputtering in wind. And from the fissure closest to my feet, something larger than all the others began to rise. Not a hand. Not a figure. A head. Its eyes opened, two pits of pure white flame, and its scream was the shoreline's scream magnified, a tidal wave of sound that shook the sky. The head that rose from the fissure was colossal, hewn from basalt yet alive, its surface shifting like wet clay. The eyes burned white, searing the fog into vapor. Its mouth gaped wider than any human's, teeth jagged like the island's shoreline itself, and when it screamed the entire ridge shuddered as though it would split apart. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the bundle of bones. My ears rang until blood dripped down my neck. The fog bell behind me shivered with each roar, its cracked mouth vibrating like a fragile shell about to burst. The shapes that had crawled from the seams fell to their knees, heads bowed toward the massive figure. Their mouths moved in silent worship. This thing, the head rising from the rock, was what they served. What they belonged to. And maybe, what I had inherited. The voice hit me directly in the chest, bypassing air, bypassing ears. It filled my blood, a command embedded into marrow. Return them. I clutched the bones tighter. Who are they? I shouted, though my voice cracked under the weight of sound. What are they to you? The head tilted, stone groaning. The fissure widened, and through it I saw more, shoulders, arms, a torso too vast to belong to earth alone. This was no single ghost. This was the island itself, clawing to free its body from beneath. The creatures that wore my family's faces hissed in unison, crawling closer. Their hands reached for me, trembling, desperate. Return them, return them. The bones in my arms twitched again. I swear I felt tiny fingers flex inside the bundle, a memory of life. My heart pounded with a sick certainty, these weren't just bones. They were keys. Pieces of the lock. If I gave them back, the fissures would widen. The prison would open. The bell throbbed once more, a weak, hollow clang that rattled the air. The great head snarled at the sound, eyes flickering. That was it, the only thing it feared. I turned, hand pressed against the bell's cold flank. "Help me," I whispered. The metal hummed, faint but insistent. The vibration crawled up my arm, setting every tooth on edge. The bell wanted to ring, but it needed more. It needed me. The bones in my arms grew heavier, dragging me toward the fissure like magnets. My knees scraped stone, my breath shuddering. The chorus screamed my name again, this time not in hunger but fury. I staggered upright, pressed both hands against the bell, and pushed with every ounce of strength left in me. The cracked mouth of the bell boomed once, a sound like a thunderclap tearing the sky. The head below howled in pain. The fissure snapped shut around its neck, slicing stone against stone. Shards rained upward like black hail. The creatures shrieked, their stolen faces unraveling into smoke. But the bones in my arms burned. They thrashed inside the bundle, fighting to be free. I held on, skin blistering from the heat of them. The bell rang a second time, louder, brighter, like the sky itself answering. And then everything stopped. The fissures sealed. The creatures vanished. The great head sank into silence. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, the bundle still clutched to me. For a moment, the island was quiet again. Too quiet. Because in that silence, the bones whispered a single word in a child's voice. Not done. The whisper from the bones froze me harder than the scream ever had. My arms trembled. My first instinct was to hurl the bundle into the sea, to watch the tide drag it away, but the thought clenched like a trap. That was exactly what the island wanted. Not done, the child's voice repeated, soft as breath against my ear. I crawled back from the bell, clutching the bundle like a cursed infant. My legs barely worked, but I forced myself toward the cottage. The path twisted in fog, every shadow a trick. Inside, the lamp guttered, sputtering to life on its own. The ledger lay open again, its pages flipped to the very back. My heart lurched. Fresh ink sprawled across the final sheet in my handwriting. The bell does not end it. The bell only resets the silence. To end it, you must give back what was stolen. The words blurred as I read them, like the paper was still wet. I dropped the book, panic clawing through me. I hadn't written that. Not consciously. The island had borrowed my hand. The walls creaked. Floorboards flexed beneath me, whispering. My reflection wavered in the salt-stained window, not just me, but a dozen versions of me, each older, more broken, more hollow. In their mouths, words formed silently, return them. The bones stirred again. This time, I felt it clear, a heartbeat. Faint, childlike, pulsing through brittle ribs. No, I muttered, clutching tighter. Not you. Not like this. The shoreline screamed, shaking the very cottage. The door burst inward though no one touched it. Fog rolled across the threshold, thick and wet, filling the room. And in that fog, the silhouettes returned, faces of family, faces of myself, stretching hands of salt toward me. I stumbled back until my shoulders hit the wall. The lamp flickered, shadows jerking. Their mouths opened in unison. Not done. Not done. Not done. The fog bell groaned again, distant but insistent, as though warning me. But this time, the creatures didn't flinch. They pressed closer, crowding the cottage until the walls bowed outward. I clutched the bundle and shouted, "Tell me what you are. Tell me why you scream." The silhouettes froze. The fog trembled. Then, from the bones themselves, the child's voice answered. We were promised the sea. We were promised release. Instead, they bound us in salt and silence. They left us here. I shook my head, horrified. Who left you? The fog parted just enough for one face to emerge clearer than the rest. It was my grandfather, eyes hollow, mouth twisted. Our own, the child's voice said. The blood before yours. They fed us to keep the island calm. My stomach lurched. My inheritance wasn't wealth, wasn't land. It was debt. A cycle of sacrifice carried through generations. The bones pulsed again. Louder now, harder. A second heartbeat joined mine. The child inside wanted out. The cottage walls cracked, plaster splitting, roof beams groaning. The fog pressed closer, cold fingers brushing my skin. My grandfather's hollow face leaned in, mouth opening too wide. And in his voice, though layered with the child's whisper, he said, "It's your turn. It's your turn." The words echoed through the cottage until every board, every nail, seemed to whisper them back. My grandfather's hollow face dissolved into fog, and the others followed, melting into a single wall of pale vapor pressing in on me. The lamp shattered, plunging the room into blackness broken only by the faint glow seeping from the bundle of bones in my arms. I staggered out into the night. The air was thick, heavy, as if the island itself was breathing against my skin. The shoreline screamed again, but now the sound bent in strange ways, some parts too high, others too low, like the voices were stretching themselves to cover every possible pitch. The fissures glowed faintly, veins of white pulsing like the island's heartbeat. And I realized, with sick clarity, that it was stronger now than when I had arrived. Every scream, every whisper, every appearance of those salt-formed figures wasn't just haunting. It was feeding. The ledger's words seared across my mind, to end it, you must give back what was stolen. But what had been stolen? The bones? Or the lives they represented? My bloodline had sealed them here, sacrificed them. That meant the debt wasn't just mine to pay, it was mine to continue. No, I whispered, shaking, teeth gritted against the island's pressure. It ends here. I carried the bones down the ridge toward the cleft pool. The fissures screamed louder the closer I came, the sound so thick I felt it in my teeth, rattling fillings loose. Shapes rose from the cracks, stretching half-formed arms toward me, but none crossed the salt lines. They waited, trembling, desperate. At the pool's edge, the water shivered with pale light, reflecting nothing but whiteness. The child's voice rose again from the bundle. Set us free. I knelt, every nerve in my body screaming at once. If I give you back, I whispered, will it end? Will the screaming stop? The bones shifted, ribs clicking faintly against one another, a sound like laughter. Yes. For us. Not for you. My grip tightened. The ledger's scrawled warnings blurred in my head. Apologies go unheard. Never promise the sea. Keep them calm. All of it had been futility. They hadn't been caretakers, they had been accomplices, feeding the island piece by piece to keep it from devouring everything. I raised the bundle over the pool, shaking. The fog behind me thickened, shapes pressing closer, whispers climbing into a single chant, return them. Return them. Return them. The pool pulsed brighter. The island's heartbeat surged, making the ground quiver under my knees. And then, from somewhere inside me, another voice cut through, familiar, steady, my mother's. Not the hollow imitation I'd heard before. Softer. Truer. Don't, she said. Don't give them what they want. Tears blurred my vision. Then what do I do? I begged the night. The fog bell tolled once, clear, sharp, like a blade across silence. The shapes shrieked, writhing back from the sound. The fissures spat salt like sparks. The pool hissed, steam rising as though it had been burned. And I understood. The bones weren't keys. They were anchors. If I gave them back, the island would open. If I kept them, the island would rage forever. Either way, the debt was mine. The child's voice rose sharp and furious from the bundle. "It's your turn." The bundle thrashed in my arms now, ribs knocking together like teeth in a storm. The child's voice shrieked, high and furious, "It's your turn." The shoreline answered in kind, a tidal wave of screams that bent the sky itself. I staggered to my feet, clutching the bones until they burned against my chest. The fissures all around me split wider, salt exploding into the air. Shapes crawled from the cracks, hundreds of them, their faces flickering with every person I'd ever loved, every version of myself I'd ever been. They didn't beg this time. They demanded. Their mouths opened wide, voices layered into one deafening chorus. "Return them." The pool boiled, bubbles bursting with each chant. Steam hissed upward, coating my skin in damp heat. The ground trembled so violently I thought the whole island might collapse into the sea. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to fling the bones into the water and escape with nothing but silence. But the silence wouldn't last. I knew it now. This wasn't about setting anyone free, it was about feeding the thing beneath, keeping it strong, keeping it eternal. The fog bell rang again, sudden and sharp, slicing through the chaos. The sound was cleaner now, almost pure. It hurt the creatures. They recoiled, their forms unraveling like smoke in wind. The fissures crackled, light sputtering in their veins. I clutched the bones tighter and screamed into the storm, "You don't own me." The child's voice laughed from the bundle, cruel and ancient. "We owned your blood before you were born." The fissures erupted, spraying shards of stone into the air. From the largest, the colossal head began to rise again, molten and furious, its white eyes burning through the fog. The island itself was breaking free. I dropped to my knees before the pool, bones shaking in my arms. My choice was as clear as it was impossible: give them back and open the lock forever, or keep them, and let the island rage until it swallowed me whole. But then I remembered the ledger's first line, the one scratched so deep it tore the paper: "If the voice knows your name, it already has you." The island knew my name. It knew my blood. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't own my silence. I pressed the bones against the fog bell instead of the pool. The iron key in my pocket pulsed hot, almost burning. I jammed it into the cracked mouth of the bell, wedging it deep. Then, with the last strength I had, I slammed the bones against the metal. The sound that followed wasn't just a toll. It was an explosion of light and vibration, a screen turned inside out. The bones shattered in my hands, dissolving into salt and fire. The creatures shrieked, bursting into fragments of dust. The fissures sealed in violent cracks, slamming shut like doors. The colossal head roared one last time, voice breaking the sky. Then it collapsed inward, swallowed by its own prison. The ground shook, then stilled. Silence fell. I dropped to the stones, my hands blistered and bleeding, the bell still humming faintly under my palm. The bones were gone. The pool was dark. The shoreline was quiet. For the first time since I set foot here, Grey Markal was still. But in the silence, I felt it. Not victory. Not peace. Just a pause. The bell had bought me time. Nothing more. And in the faint hum beneath my skin, I knew the island was waiting. I sat slumped against the fog bell until the stars bled into dawn. My ears still rang from the strike, my hands raw and blistered from the bones that had shattered in my grip. The air was eerily calm, the sea lying flat as polished glass. For a few precious hours, the island almost felt empty. But Grey Markal is never empty. The quiet didn't comfort me, it terrified me. Silence here was never absence. It was always waiting. I stumbled down the ridge toward the cottage, every step heavy. The ledger was still there, pages spread across the table as if waiting for me. I almost didn't want to touch it, but something drew me close. The ink on the last page had changed again. Where my false handwriting had once scrawled to end it, "You must give back what was stolen," now new lines sprawled across the paper. You delayed us. But you cannot erase us. We are in the rock. We are in the sea. We are in you. I slammed the book shut, chest heaving. My reflection in the window warped with the morning light, dozens of me staring back again. Each reflection whispered silently, lips curling around words I couldn't hear but already knew. Not done. I grabbed the ledger and hurled it into the fireplace, watching as the damp pages hissed and curled in flame. The smoke smelled of salt, acrid and sharp, like burning flesh. But even as the book blackened, I heard whispers in the crackling wood, mocking me. You cannot burn stone. I ran outside. The island looked different in daylight, less sinister, more barren, but the fissures were still there, faint white scars stretching across the black rock. I knelt beside one, pressing my ear close. At first, nothing. Then, just barely, I heard it. Breathing. Slow. Patient. As if the island itself were sleeping. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. All I had done was force it into slumber. The bell had sealed it again, but the seal was temporary. Just as it had been for whoever came before me. The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't inheritance. This was entrapment. Each generation wasn't given the island, they were shackled to it. The duty wasn't to own, but to contain. And now, it was me. The screams would return. The fissures would open again. And when they did, I would have to be ready. Or I'd be dragged under like the rest of my bloodline. The fairy horn sounded faintly through the fog. I froze, heart hammering. The captain, he had actually come back. My chance to leave. My chance to escape. But as I stood at the shoreline, staring at the mist where the boat would appear, the island whispered through the salt air, soft as a lullaby. If you leave, we'll follow. I staggered back from the rocks, shaking my head. Escape wasn't possible. Not really. I could flee the island, but it was inside me now, threaded through blood and bone. And as the fairy's shadow emerged in the fog, I knew I had to choose, board it and carry the curse with me into the world, or stay, and fight to keep the screaming chained here a little longer. The fairy's horn cut through the fog again, closer this time. I saw its outline, a shape of salvation drifting toward me. My legs ached to run, to wave my arms, to beg the captain to take me anywhere but here. But the island didn't scream. It whispered. If you leave, we'll follow. The words crawled through my blood, steady as a heartbeat. My reflection stared at me from the black rocks, dozens of me again, each older, hollower, their mouths whispering silently, not done. The fairy's prow broke through the fog. I could see the captain's face now, pale, worried. He scanned the shoreline as if looking for me. My chance. My only chance. I turned toward the cottage one last time. The roof sagged, the salt lines crumbled, the ledger now ash in the fireplace. Nothing about it looked alive, yet the ground beneath it pulsed faintly, as though the island's heart beat just below the surface. If I left, I would carry it with me. The voices had said as much. The fissures would follow, the screams would echo across whatever shore I touched. The curse was portable. It was blood-borne. I pressed my palm against the nearest seam. The stone was warm, faintly trembling. Beneath it, I swore I felt the brush of fingers pressing back. Not claws. Not rage. Fingers. Human. Trapped. I whispered into the crack, "What are you?" A single voice answered, layered with hundreds, deep as the ocean itself, "We are what your family fed us. We are what you will feed us. We are forever hungry." The fairy's horn blared again, impatient. The captain waved, urging me to move. Tears stung my eyes. My whole body screamed for escape. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Greymarkle wasn't a prison I could walk away from. It was an infection. And I was its host. I climbed the ridge one last time, to the fog bell. The crack in its mouth glowed faintly, the iron key still wedged inside. My blistered hand rested against the metal. It thrummed weakly, like a dying heartbeat. I could board the ferry, leave the island behind, and let the curse spread wherever I went. Or I could stay. Stay, and keep ringing the bell every time the seam split, every time the screaming rose, every time the debt demanded payment. Stay, and rot here as every bloodline before me had rotted. The fog thinned. I could see the ferry more clearly now. The captain's mouth moved. Hurry. My hand tightened on the bell. It was cold now, almost dead. But not silent. Never silent. I turned back toward the shoreline. The fishers glowed faintly, waiting. Patient. The voices whispered in unison. Choose. The ferry's horn cried one last time. And I realized, with a weight heavier than the sea itself, that there was no choice. Not really. Because when you inherit Greymark Isle, you don't inherit land. You inherit the hunger. You inherit the screams. I pressed my forehead to the bell, whispering into the metal as the ferry drifted away into the fog without me. It's my turn. The bell thrummed in answer. The island exhaled. And the shoreline screamed again.